Gosh, guys, I don't know what's happening. I keep losing connection today. I'm not sure why. This is the first time this has ever happened. But anyway, we're telling the story of Joseph and the multicolored coat. And so far in the story, we've talked about Jacob having 12 sons, and Joseph being one of the youngest sons in the family, and his father spent more time with him, and Joseph became very special to his father. And because Jacob, the dad, was older when he had Joseph, he loved Joseph very much and openly treated Joseph better than his other brothers. And this made the other brothers jealous. They had to work really hard in the field all day while Joseph was at home with Dad. And to make matters worse, their dad had a very special coat made for Joseph. This coat was very special indeed. It was more like a robe. It was long and it had sleeves that were wide at the bottom. It was so beautiful it had every color of the rainbow in it. And Joseph loved the coat so very much that he put it on immediately and he went to show it to his brothers. And when his brothers saw it, they got even more jealous. They thought that somehow that coat was going to mean that their dad was going to try to bypass all of them and allow Joseph to assume family leadership someday. And that was very upsetting to them, because back in those days, the oldest usually inherited the most in the family. And they thought that they was being slighted somehow, being cheated. And that made them really, really angry with Joseph, and they were very jealous of him, and they couldn't even say anything nice to him anymore. They were just always very mad. Now, not long after this, Joseph has a dream. And the next day he told his brothers what he had dreamed, and he said, "Guess what? Last night I had the strangest dream. All of us was out working in a field, and we were gathering up bunches of grain out in the field, and suddenly my bunch of grain stood straight up, and all of your bunches bowed down to it." And his brothers looked at him with hate, and they said, "Well, who do you think you are that we're going to bow down to you? You must have been dreaming." And his father said to him, the next night, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The next night, Joseph had another dream. And now in this dream, there was the moon and the sun and 11 stars in this dream. And in this dream, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down to Joseph. And the next morning, he woke up and he told his family about that dream. And his father said to him, "What is this dream that you had? Should your mother and I and your brothers indeed someday come to bow down to you?" And although this made his brothers even more mad at him when they heard the dream, they said, "Do you think you're better than all of us? Do you really think that we would ever bow down to you?" But his father thought long and hard about what Joseph had told him. He remembered his dream about the ladder to heaven, and he knew that God could communicate with us through our dreams. And a couple of days later, Jacob asked Joseph to go check on his brothers who were out in the field. So Joseph grabbed his coat and he went to find them so he could report back to his father on how they were doing. And he came across a man and he asked him, had he seen his brothers? And the man told him that he had, and that they had gone to Dothan. So Joseph went to find his brothers in Dothan. And when his brothers saw him coming off in the distance, they made a plan to kill him. They said to one another, "Look, here comes that dreamer. Let's just kill him and be done with it. We can throw his body in that old pit over there and tell Father that a beast ate him." Now, when Reuben the oldest heard the plan, he said, "Come on now, we can't kill him. We don't want his blood on our hands. Let's just throw him in the pit out there and leave him." He said this because secretly he planned on coming back and rescuing Joseph when the other brothers had left. Reuben truly did care for all of his brothers, even Joseph, and he knew how much his father would hurt if something was to happen to Joseph. So when Joseph came to them, they yanked him out of his beautiful coat, and they flung him into the pit in the field, and he hit the bottom like a rock. There was no water in the pit. It was dry and hard. Joseph cried out for their help, but his brothers ignored his pleas. In fact, they cared so little for Joseph that they sat down to eat, and they listened as Joseph cried for help and begged for mercy. They were cruel, and they didn't feel bad at all for the way they were treating their little brother. And now while they were eating, a group of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, and they had spices and balms and myrrh, and they were headed to Egypt to sell them. And one of Joseph's brothers, Judah said, "Well, what could we get for killing Joseph? Not 1 cent. And he is our brother after all. Why don't we just sell him, and then our troubles will be gone?" Now all the brothers agreed that this was a good idea. All of the brothers but Reuben, that is. Reuben had gone back to work in the field. Now, some Midianites came along. They were merchantmen. And so the brothers pulled Joseph from the pit, and Judah sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Little did they know, or care, what was going to happen to Joseph. They didn't know that the Midianites was going to sell Joseph in Egypt to a man named Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaohs and a captain of the guard. They didn't care that they were selling their little brother to be a slave. As long as he never returned to their father and home was the only thing that they cared about. But little did they know that this was all part of God's divine plan, and that someday Joseph would save his people. It was God's plan all along to put Joseph in Egypt. Reuben, who had gone back to the fields to work, didn't know what his other brothers had done. So when he returned later to get Joseph from the pit, he didn't know what to think when Joseph wasn't there. "Where is Joseph? Where should I go look for him? What have you done?" They told Reuben what they had done. The rest of the brothers then took the multicolored coat and they dipped it in some goat's blood and took it back to their father. They told their father that they had found the coat that way, and that they thought a wild beast must have eaten Joseph, and that the only thing left of him was this special coat. When their father Jacob saw the coat, he couldn't believe his eyes. He said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast has eaten him." And he cried out loudly, and he mourned for his son many, many days. He was heartbroken, and he cried for many days. He was miserable. And his hypocritical sons pretended to be sad about the loss of Joseph, but inside they were glad. Jacob was so sad that he couldn't even be comforted. Now his children truly did try to make him feel better, but he refused. He told them that he would go down in his grave mourning his son, and Jacob continued to weep. Meanwhile in Egypt, Joseph had been sold to Potiphar and was a slave. But the Lord was with Joseph, and he helped him do things perfectly. And Potiphar, the officer of the Pharaoh, he noticed that everything that Joseph did was done perfectly. So he made Joseph the overseer of his house. He put Joseph in charge of everything he owned. He trusted Joseph with every single thing he had, even his food. He knew that Joseph was a good person. Now, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all things, even the fields that belonged to Potiphar. The only problem was that Potiphar had a wicked wife, and she told a lie on Joseph and made it look like he had done a terrible thing. Now, even though Potiphar knew Joseph, he thought he must be wrong. So he sent Joseph to prison, a place where the king's prisoners were kept. And there he was, in prison, and he had done nothing wrong. But the Lord was still with Joseph in prison, and he showed him mercy. The Lord gave Joseph favor in front of the warden in the prison, and the warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. He never worried because the Lord was with Joseph, and he always helped him do things perfectly. Now, after some time passed, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker to the Pharaoh were sent to the prison, and the warden put them in with Joseph and put Joseph in charge of them. What is a cupbearer, you might ask? A cupbearer is an officer of high rank in the royal court, and it's his duty to serve the drinks at the royal table. Why would an officer of high rank serve drinks? Wouldn't that just be a bartender? No, not just anybody could do the job of a cupbearer. There was constant fear of plots and spies, and the person had to be regarded as thoroughly trustworthy to hold that position. Now, one night, the cupbearer and the baker each had a dream. And the next day they looked so sad. And Joseph said to them, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they told him, "We have dreamed a dream, and there's no one to tell us the meaning of the dream." Joseph told them only God can interpret dreams, but with God's help, he could try to figure it out. So they told their dreams to Joseph. The cupbearer told Joseph that he dreamed of a vine, and on the vine there was 3 branches, and as soon as the branches budded, they would flower, and as soon as they'd flower, they'd turn into clusters of grapes immediately. And the cupbearer was holding the Pharaoh's cup under the grapes, and he squeezed them, and it filled the Pharaoh's cup immediately. And then he handed the full cup to the Pharaoh in his dream. Joseph said to the cupbearer, "This is the meaning of that dream. The 3 branches are 3 days, and within 3 days, the Pharaoh will return you to your job while holding that very cup in his hands. And please remember me when the Pharaoh restores you. Please mention me to the Pharaoh, for I've done nothing to deserve being in this dungeon. Please ask him to help get me out of here," Joseph said. Now, after hearing this, the chief baker thought he wanted to tell his dream to Joseph and find out what it meant. He said, "I had 3 white baskets that I was carrying on the top of my head. And in the top basket, I had all kinds of bread and goodies that were made just for the Pharaoh. But the birds, they kept pecking at it. They pecked at all of it on the top of the basket. What does that mean?" asked the chief baker. This time Joseph didn't really want to interpret the dream, but he did. He told the baker that the 3 baskets meant 3 days would pass. But on the 3rd day, the Pharaoh would hang him and the birds would eat his flesh. How hard do you think it was for the cupbearer and the baker to wait those 3 days? Both of them with different expectations for that day. That cupbearer, he was anxiously awaiting for those days to pass so quickly so he could be free. But the baker, I'm sure those 3 days were really hard for him. He knew that those were his last 3 days. Eventually, the 3 days came to pass, and it was the Pharaoh's birthday on that day. And he had a great party, and he invited all of his council to attend. And he held a great feast, and he brought out the cupbearer and the baker. And he restored the cupbearer to his job while holding his cup high in the air. But when it came to the baker, he did exactly as Joseph had told him. Yet the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, nor did he mention him to the Pharaoh, as he was filled with excitement to be free. So Joseph stayed in jail for another 2 years. One night the Pharaoh had a dream that nobody could explain to him. He called all the magicians and all of the wise men of Egypt, but none of them knew what to think of the Pharaoh's dream. Suddenly, The cupbearer remembered Joseph and what he had done for him. So he told the Pharaoh that Joseph could interpret dreams, and what he had said had came to be true. So the Pharaoh requested that Joseph be brought to him. They got him all cleaned up, and they brought him up there, and there he was in front of the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh said, "Do you understand dreams?" "It is not me, but God who helps me," Joseph replied. So the Pharaoh told Joseph of the dream he had had. "I dreamed that 7 fat cows came up from the river, and they stood by the bank. And then another 7 skinny, sick cows came up from the river, and they ate the fat cows. After that I had another strange dream. 7 full stalks of corn were growing by the river, and they were full of ears that were thick and juicy. And suddenly 7 skinny stalks came up, and they had no ears of corn growing on them. Instead, it was just empty cobs and shells. And the 7 skinny stalks devoured the full stalks." "Whatever do you think that means?" asked the Pharaoh. "God has shown you what to do. Both of these dreams are but one dream. There will be 7 good years, followed by 7 bad years. There will be 7 good years first, so good there will be extra food for everyone. But those 7 years will be followed by 7 bad years of famine. So, you should save a little bit each year from the harvest, and that way we'll have enough to get you through the bad years," Joseph told the Pharaoh. Pharaoh believed all that Joseph had told him, and he ended up putting him in charge of all the land of Egypt. The only person with more power in all of Egypt over Joseph was just the Pharaoh. He was promoted to vizier, which is sort of like being the vice president of Egypt. And not only did he promote Joseph, he also changed his name to Zaphenath-Paneah, which meant the revealer of secrets. Joseph, who had once been a shepherd in the fields, who had been sold to be a slave in Egypt, who had once been a prisoner in a dungeon, now Joseph was a very rich man. He wore expensive clothing, he rode in chariots, he ran around with the Pharaoh, and people bowed down to him in respect. Now Joseph had the people in each of the towns and cities of Egypt set aside 1/5 of all the crops that were harvested each year to keep for the upcoming famine in Egypt. All the extra food was stored in each city to protect them from the famine. Being protected from a famine. What exactly is a famine? Well, a famine is a severe shortage of food that's going to cause people to starve. This famine was going to be so severe that nothing would grow for 7 years. So severe that the people wouldn't even remember the 7 years before when there was so much growing. In fact, it was going to be so severe that all of Egypt might die of starvation. These kind of things usually happen due to some kind of terrible weather event. In this case, the Nile River couldn't raise and it couldn't irrigate the water and it wouldn't grow crops. Did this famine come to pass? Did this really happen? Yes, it really did. Yes, it really did. And how do we know that it really did? Well, in Egypt, there are hieroglyphs. And a hieroglyph is a type of Egyptian writing that's done with pictures instead of words. Now located on Seal Island in the Nile River near Aswan in Egypt, the hieroglyphs tell of a 7-year famine during the 3rd dynasty. And not only that, in 2009, on a BBC broadcast of the show Religions, Judaism, and Joseph, there's now new scientific evidence that supports the case of the historical Joseph and the famine event by looking at drilled out cores of ice taken from Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the mountain that supplies the Nile River with all of its water. Those ice cores reveal that there was a drought about 3,600 years ago, which is about the time that the Bible tells the story of Joseph. So yes, there still is proof around today that there was a 7-year famine. It came to pass. Now the 7 good years came, and 2 of the bad years were upon the people, and everyone was starving. People came from all of the countries to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. People came from near and far and traveled many days to find food. Back in Canaan, where Joseph's father and brothers still lived, the famine was getting so bad that Reuben, the oldest brother, had decided that this was his punishment for what they had done to Joseph. It had gotten so bad that Jacob decided that he must send his sons to Egypt to try and find food. He had heard that there was food to be bought. He kept Benjamin at home, and he sent the other brothers to Egypt. And when the brothers arrived in Egypt, they reached a palace where the grain was being stored. They noticed a very well-dressed man in royal robes sitting in a very tall chair, and he was supervising the distribution of the grain. They approached the man. Little did they know it was Joseph. And when they approached, Joseph saw that his brothers had come to get food. Joseph recognized his brothers, but it had been 10 years since they had seen him, and they weren't expected to see him, so they didn't even recognize him. And he was dressed up in those robes, and he looked so different, they wouldn't recognize him anyway. Joseph then noticed that his little brother Benjamin was not with them. And just like in the dream he had had when he was young at home with his family, the brothers all bowed down to Joseph, whom they didn't recognize. And then Joseph realized that they didn't know him. He said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan, from a family of 12. The famine has struck us very badly, and we've come to buy food. Our father is waiting for us at home." Joseph spoke roughly to them, and he said, "You look like spies. Are you sure you're not here to bring harm to our people?" "Oh, no, we are here to buy food. We are a family. We are one man's sons, not spies," they replied. "But you said you're a family of 12, yet only 10 are here." "You are lying. You are spies," Joseph said. "The youngest is still home with our father, and one of our brothers is no longer with us," they told Joseph. "Well, if this is true, then let one of you go home and fetch your brother. The rest of you shall wait in prison, and we'll see if you're telling the truth or if you are spies." And Joseph sent them to prison for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "If you're truly good men, let one of you stay, and the rest of you can carry the grain for the famine back to your families. But you must bring your youngest brother back to me so that your words can be verified. Don't return here ever again unless you bring your younger brother with you." And the brothers spoke to one another in their own language, and they didn't realize that Joseph could understand them. And they said to one another, "We are guilty for selling our brother. We heard his cries and his pleas, and we ignored him. That's why this is happening to us." And Reuben answered them, and he said, "I told you not to hurt him, and you wouldn't listen. And now here we are, and we need him." It was decided that Simeon would stay behind. Joseph commanded the workers to fill his brother's sacks with corn and to put the money they brought with them back into the sacks with their grain. Now, once their donkeys were loaded with the sacks of grain, the brothers set off for home. When they opened their sacks, they saw the money inside, and they didn't know what to think. They were scared. They thought that somehow they were being tricked. And when they got to their father, they said, "The man who is Lord of the land, he spoke roughly to us, and he called us spies. We tried to explain that we weren't spies, but 12 brothers, sons of one father, and that one's no longer with us, and one is home with our father in Canaan. And the man told us that in order to prove that we're telling the truth, that one of us had to stay behind. while the rest of us brought back the food. And when we return, we have to bring our youngest brother to that man so that he'll believe we're not spies. And to make matters worse, Father, after we left with our sack full of grain, we later saw that somehow the money was still in the sack. Oh, this made Jacob very afraid when he heard what had happened, and he said to his sons, I'm the loser in this deal. Already Joseph is gone, and now Simeon's gone, and you want to take Benjamin away? Everything's against me. And then the father said, No, Benjamin shall not go with you. Joseph is already dead, and he is left alone. If something bad was to happen to Benjamin, I would surely die of sorrow. So, they stayed. They stayed, and they ate all that they had brought back to their home. And once again, they needed to go back to Egypt to buy more grain. And Judah said to his father, We must take Benjamin with us. He told us not to return without our brother, or he's going to think we're spies. And Jacob said to him, Well, if that is the only way, then I guess we must send Benjamin along. Before you go, take some honey and some spices and some nuts and almonds along with you to give to that man, and take double the money, so that they don't accuse you of stealing the last time. And my God Almighty give you mercy, so that he will not only send back Benjamin, but also Simeon. For if I lose my son, I will surely die. They did have a few little items left to eat, like honey and spices. But what good are they without bread to fill your belly and enjoy them? They needed the bread, not just the goodies. They had to go get that grain. So the brothers gathered up all that the father had said, and they set out for Egypt with Benjamin. And when they got to Egypt and stood before Joseph, he said, Bring these men to my home, and we will prepare a feast, and they will eat with me at noon. And the men brought Joseph's brothers to his home. And they were very afraid because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time. He's mad at us, and they're going to take our donkeys, and they're going to grab us and throw us in jail, one of the brothers said. Joseph came to his house, and he said to one of them, and one of them said to him, one of the brothers said to Joseph, Oh, sir, the last time we came and bought grain, when we opened our sacks, everyone's money was still in the sack. So we've brought that back again with us to repay for the grain, and we've brought more money to buy more today. And Joseph said to them, Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has returned your treasure to you. I had your money, but I returned it. And then he brought Simeon out, and he returned him to his brothers. And then the brothers entered Joseph's house, and Joseph's men brought them water to drink and washed their feet and fed their donkeys. And at noon, when they were about ready to eat, Joseph asked them, Is your father well? The old man that you told me about, is he still alive? Yes, they answered, Our father is in good health. He is still alive. And it was then that Joseph noticed that Benjamin was with him. And he said, Is this your youngest brother that you told me about? Yes, they answered, yes. It had been so long since he had seen Benjamin, and he was so glad to see him. And he was so glad to see that his brothers had not done something wicked to him, like they had to him. He was so glad to see Benjamin that he had to leave the room and go cry. And when he finished crying, he quickly washed his face, and he went back to where his brothers were. Now, back in those days, an Egyptian would not eat in the same room as an Hebrew, because that was unacceptable. It was an abomination, they called it. So Joseph ate his meal with the other Egyptians while his brothers dined in another room. And Joseph told his men to take everyone lots of food, but to make sure that Benjamin's portion was 5 times bigger than any of the others. But everyone ate and drank, and they had a merry good time. Joseph told his men to fill his brother's sacks with as much grain as it would hold, and to put all of their money back in their sacks. But in Benjamin's sack, he also put in his silver cup that belonged to Joseph. And as soon as morning came, the brothers took their loaded donkeys and they set off for Canaan. Now, after a short time, Joseph sent his men after them. He had told them to look for his cup and to bring it back if they had it. And when the men got to the brothers, they said, "We hear that you have returned our Lord's good deed with evil by stealing from him." And the brothers replied, "Why would we do that? The last time we came, someone returned our money, and we even brought that back with us this time. We're not thieves." But the men demanded to look in their sacks. And when they did, they found the silver cup in Benjamin's sack. The brothers were so saddened by this, they tore their clothes, and they put all the stuff back on their donkeys and loaded them down, and they returned to the city. And when they had gotten to Joseph's house, and he was still there, they fell down before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, "What have you done?" And Judah replied, "What shall we say? How can we clear ourselves? The cup was in Benjamin's sack." And Joseph said, "God forbid that I should do this, but the man who had my cup shall be my servant. And as for the rest of you, go and bring your father to me." Judah said, "If we return to our father without our youngest brother, it will kill him. He will die of a broken heart. He's already lost one son, and this is the last of his mother. Our father could not take this heartache. He will surely die if we return without Benjamin." At that point, Joseph told all of his men and all of his servants to leave them alone. Now, after everybody left, and it was just Joseph and his brothers there, Joseph could no longer keep his secret. He so wanted to see his father that he said, "It is I, your brother Joseph. Do you not know me still? I am the brother that you sold to the merchants going to Egypt. Is my father still alive?" And Joseph, he wept so loudly that even the Pharaoh heard him at his house in the palace. Now the brothers, they were so surprised and disturbed by this revelation, they kind of freaked out. Wouldn't you freak out if someone who you thought was going to throw you in jail suddenly said, "Don't you know me? I'm your brother. How's Dad doing?" Especially if you had sold your brother. I think it would scare you quite a bit. They didn't even think he was alive, much less a vizier of Egypt. Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid, nor angry with yourselves, even though you sold me. God sent me here before you to save our people. For 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are another 5 years to come. It was not you that sent me here. It was God that did so. It was also God who made me the vizier to the Pharaoh, and lord of all of his house, and ruler throughout the land of Egypt. Hurry, go and tell Father that his son Joseph, that God has made me the lord of all Egypt, and for him to come to Egypt as quickly as he can." And when the Pharaoh heard that Joseph's family was coming to Egypt, he was pleased, and he told Joseph that when his family got there, that he would give them a special place to live, and that none of them shall ever hunger. So Jacob and his 11 sons, and all of their wives, and his daughter, and all of the children, and all of the animals came to Egypt. Jacob was so happy to see Joseph again. He never dreamed he would see his son alive. But here he was, not just alive, but helping others survive. The Pharaoh kept his word, and he let Joseph's family live in the land of Goshen, which was the land of the Ramses. That was one of the best places you could live back then. And Joseph's family never wanted for anything ever again. They had all the food they would ever need, and they still had each other. Now that concludes our story for the week. This week we learned that we all have special talents, and that it's important not to want what others have, but to be happy with what God's given us. We also learned that we are our brother's keeper, and that includes more than just our siblings or even our family. We're here to look out for each other, to love one another. Joseph was his brother's keeper, even when his brothers hadn't even shown him love. He was not just his brother's keeper in the sense of the word brother either. He helped save an entire generation and nation, and they would have otherwise starved. He never forgot his family, and he was there for them in their times of trouble. Now, if you enjoyed this story and you want to read it yourself, it can be found in the greatest book that was ever written, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, chapters 37 through 47. Don't forget to join us next week. It's going to be our final episode for our Vacation Bible Series adventure. It's going to be on Wednesday the 29th at 8 p.m. right here, Fruit of the Vine Arts Studio. Thanks for joining me tonight. Sorry about that mishap we had earlier. I hope I get to see you here next week for our final episode. I can see quite a few of you watching tonight, and I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming, guys. See you next week. Bye. Oh, it didn't turn off. Bye.